first class today late too, so I don't feel bad, Professor.
But you knew where to be.
Oh.
That makes it worse. So thank you all for coming to the first Federalist Society event of this school year. My name is Blaise Uriarty. I am the Federalist Society president, and I'm really happy to see you all here. I hope that you'll enjoy some lunch while you're here with Professor Blackman. Now, Professor Blackman, he has done a lot of work in the constitutional realm. He has been quoted in 2 presidential impeachment trials.
Back to back.
I mean, that's kind of historical, actually, so
Cool.
high five for that.
High five. I like it.
And he's served as a professor at the South Texas College of Law, and he's contributed to several nationwide publications, among them Forbes magazine, and he's also been on NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, and the BBC. And he's here today to talk about the recent Supreme Court terms. So everybody give it up for Professor Josh Blackman.
Thank you so much. Thank you. My first time to Nova, so it's actually a pleasure to be here. If I came before, now it's time to know where it is. The Supreme Court. So you guys are living in interesting times. The Supreme Court is very much in a state of flux. Things are changing rapidly. When I went to law school, things were actually pretty static. There'd been sort of a status quo. Indeed, between 1994 and 2005, the composition of the Supreme Court stayed the same. They had the exact same membership. But then in 2005, things started to change. I need to get to the present by starting with the past. So what happened in 2005? The first significant move was Justice Sandra Day O'Connor announced she'd be stepping down. Justice O'Connor had been a Reagan appointee, sort of a moderate Republican, but often the so-called swing vote. She always kind of went to the left, went to the right. You never really knew where she would wind up in a case. She stepped down not because of her health, but actually the health of her husband. This is sort of a sad story. Her husband was suffering from dementia, and she made the decision to leave the U.S. Supreme Court to take care of her husband. Now, the saddest part was his dementia declined very rapidly, and he forgot who she was. As you may know, that happens a lot. You guys are in South Florida. I'm sure you know how that happens. And he had to move to a home, so she stepped down from the court to be with him, and she couldn't be with him. So that was actually very sad. So President George W. Bush made a decision to replace Justice O'Connor with John Roberts. Wait a minute, you say, no, that's not what happened. Well, shortly after O'Connor announced retirement, Chief Justice William Rehnquist passed away. He had been sick with cancer for years, but he thought he could hold on, and he suddenly died in September of 2005. That gave George W. Bush probably the most important decisions of his presidency. Who to pick to be Chief Justice? So Bush made a fateful decision. He elevated John Roberts from the Associate Justice seat to the Chief Justice seat. So then who would Bush pick to replace Sandra Day O'Connor? Aha. There was a lot of pressure on him that you have to pick a woman to replace a female justice. That's how it went back then. In fact, Laura Bush, his wife, was really mad at him for not picking a woman. It's true. So Bush picked Harriet Miers for the Supreme Court. Does anyone even know the name Harriet Miers? You've heard that name? Good job. As you can tell, she's not in the Supreme Court now. Miers had never been a judge. She had no real experience with constitutional law. She had been Bush's personal attorney in the White House, his White House counsel. Conservatives rebelled. They flipped out. And Bush withdrew the nomination for Miers, and they nominated Samuel Alito to the Supreme Court. Alito had been a federal appellate judge in the Third Circuit for almost 2 decades by that point. And he was very well regarded. But here we have the first shift of the court to the right. While Justice O'Connor had been sort of this moderate Republican appointee, this kind of swing vote, Justice Alito would be a far more conservative judge. So it was once a 5 to 4-ish conservative court, went left and right about equal amounts of time, was now pushed just a smidge to the right. Okay. Fast forward to 2008, President Obama wins the election. And shortly after Obama takes office, Justice David Souter announced he would retire. Souter was an appointee of President George H.W. Bush, yet he was a member of the court's liberal wing. There was no doubt about it. He would say that I didn't move to the right, the country moved to the right, and I stayed where I am, so that's why he looks more to the left, whatever. He was consistently voted with the court's liberal wing. Souter also hated Washington. He lived in New Hampshire. He got out of Dodge whenever he could, and he stepped down very quickly. President Obama nominated to replace Souter Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who was a federal appellate judge from New York. So that, even on paper, replacing a Republican appointee with a Democrat appointee, ideologically they were about the same. Souter and Sotomayor were in the same ballpark. The following year, Justice John Paul Stevens steps down. Who's Justice Stevens? He was a President Ford appointee. He'd been in the court for almost 35 years. He'd been suffering some health issues. He was ready to go. He was replaced by Justice Elena Kagan. Kagan had been not a judge, she'd been the dean of the Harvard Law School, which was a bit of an unusual pick, but she was a dean of the Harvard Law School, served very briefly as Solicitor General, and then President Obama put her on the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay. So again, the breakdown of the court stayed more or less the same. At the center of the court, there was Justice Anthony Kennedy. Kennedy was a Reagan appointee, and again, a right-leaning moderate or a left-leaning conservative, depending on how to put it. He was a bit of a swing vote. In those years, in 2010, 2011, Justice Kennedy was in the majority 95% of the time. Whatever he said went. His most momentous rulings concerned gay marriage. He decided the case of Bergefell in 2015, which recognized the right of same-sex marriage throughout the country. But then we jump ahead to 2016. This was a sort of pivot point for the Supreme Court, really for the entire country. In February of 2016, Justice Antonin Scalia goes on a hunting trip in West Texas. He would not come home from that trip. One day, he went to sleep, and the next morning, he did not wake up. Every day, say a prayer, you wake up. There's no guarantee that happens to any of us, right? When Scalia died, it was a very pivotal time. We were in the middle of the 2016 presidential election. That evening, Donald Trump, who was a candidate, went on the stage at a debate in Charleston. He said, if you vote for me, here's who I'm going to pick for the Supreme Court. He put two names, Bill Pryor and Dianne Sykes, by the way, neither of whom made it to the Supreme Court. They perhaps should have, but they were not picked. Trump, whatever you think about him, understands politics. And he knew that Republican voters were sort of on the fence about him. And he just figured out that if I can convince these people that I can be trusted on the Scalia seat, that I have a shot at winning the nomination. Right, back then in February 2016, he didn't have a lock on it. It was still, you had Jeb Bush, you had Ted Cruz, you had Marco Rubio, you had different candidates, right? We didn't know who it was going to be. But as soon as Trump took that position, he started running away with it. Indeed, Trump put out these lists of judges. He said, if you pick me, I will nominate someone from this list to prove that he can be trusted. And I actually praised Trump, who I've been somewhat doubtful about, saying this is a good list. All right. So comes the election, and, I thought, and you thought, of course Hillary's going to win. There's no chance. I kind of became, all right, the Supreme Court's going to go to the left now. Scalia will be replaced by some, liberal judge, and it won't be a 5-4 court anymore. And then, maybe in a couple of years, Justice Kennedy will step down. It'll be a 6-3 court, and basically conservatives will be an endangered species, right? They just will not exist in the Supreme Court. But the law didn't go that way. Trump won the election, and with that, Hillary Clinton would not make the appointment. And indeed, there's some speculation that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was holding out for Hillary to replace her. We'll get to that in a minute. That wouldn't happen. So Trump comes into office in 2017, and one of his first acts is to pick a justice for the Scalia seat. He picks Neil Gorsuch, who, by the way, was not on the original list. He was on the second list. Gorsuch was added later. Kavanaugh also was not on the first list. He was on the third list. You're sensing a pattern. The first list never actually went very far. Gorsuch was an appellate judge in the 10th Circuit in Denver, Colorado. He had served as a law clerk for Justice Kennedy and Justice White. And he'd been very well regarded. He was confirmed without too much difficulty, yet there was a filibuster. Democrats tried to block his nomination. this was a mistake, because Gorsuch was as bad a consensus pick as you were going to get. And the Republicans did what's called the nuclear option. Sounds very fancy. All it means is you change the rule. They changed the rule such that it only required a simple majority in the Senate to confirm. You didn't need to have a filibuster-proof majority. This was significant because if the Democrats had not filibustered Gorsuch, they could have blocked the next nomination easily. So they made a miscalculation there. About a year and a half later, the shock happened, right? The Gorsuch seat didn't really change the court. You had a conservative for conservative, Scalia for Gorsuch. The composition of the court stayed the same. But about a year later, the composition would change. Justice Kennedy, who had been the swing vote on all these major issues, said, I am stepping down. And the theory was he was stepping down so he could be replaced by one of his former clerks, a guy named Brett Kavanaugh. Fun fact, did you know that Justice Gorsuch and Kavanaugh clerked together? They were co-clerks. They never talk about it. It's the weirdest thing. They never talk about it. I don't think they're friends. Fun fact, do you know they went to the same high school? They were about 2 years apart in high school at the same small Maryland high school. They're in the same the yearbook, right? Brett Kavanaugh's yearbook. They're in the same yearbook. No one ever talks about Kavanaugh's, Gorsuch's yearbook. He was, the man's never done anything wrong in his life. He's like this perfect thing, right? I don't know if he even likes beer. Justice Kennedy's retirement, though, would shift the entire trajectory of the court. It would shift the entire trajectory of the court. Because instead of having this sort of this moderate conservative, you would have Justice Kavanaugh, who was perhaps not a Justice Thomas, but definitely a solid conservative in most regards. This was the switch that made the court different, right? This was Trump's sort of coup de grace. And now cases that went 5-4 one way, 5-4 the other way would now go 5-4 consistently. Kavanaugh's first term was not necessarily the best. I think he was still finding his footing. He sort of figured it out more recently. I think he's more or less figured out where he's supposed to be. But the first year was a little bit bumpy. All right. So let's jump ahead now to COVID, right? COVID happens in March of 2020. The court, for the first time ever, shuts down. It never happened before. And they cancel all the oral arguments, and they don't know what the heck to do. And then, in September of 2020, while they're sort of holding virtual arguments, the news happens, actually, at Rosh Hashanah, on September of 2020. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passes away. This was a bombshell. It happened again. The death of a Supreme Court justice on the eve of a presidential election. At least when Scalia died, he died in February, which was about 8 or 9 months before the election. Ginsburg died in September, like 6 weeks before the election would happen. And what would Trump do? He had choices, right? So imagine Trump could have said, if you want to fill the seat, you got to vote for me, right? Vote for me, I'll fill the seat. Or Trump could have said, let's have the election and let's fill it after the election. That's not Trump's move. Trump said, let's go. And he said, let's fill it immediately. And I mean right away. So who did he pick? Well, he had to pick someone who he already vetted, because he didn't have time to vet people again. And Trump had vetted a judge from judge from Indiana, Amy Coney Barrett, for the Kavanaugh seat. So he had already gone through, he liked her. Who was Amy Coney Barrett? She was a law professor. She clerked for Justice Scalia. Never really had much practical experience, but people liked her. It helps be liked, I guess. I wouldn't know. It's true. Trump picks Amy Coney Barrett. As Trump would say, she's out central casting. She's charismatic. She's photogenic. Has a big, beautiful family, adopted kids. I mean, she has a whole package, right? It's made for camera. She's also very smart. She's very smart, and she speaks very well in a way people can understand it. By the way, her new book, you should buy it. A new book called Listening to the Law. I recommend it. Parts of it I find kind of slow, but you'll enjoy it. It's a good book on the whole. He picks her in September or early October of 2020. The goal is to get her confirmed before the election. They race through the process. They have a confirmation hearing, and she's confirmed, was it Halloween or the day before Halloween? I mean, so basically October 29th or 30th. I have these dates are somewhere in my head. You can Google me on that one. Confirmed end of October. The election happens 2 days later. And we all know what happened with the 2020 election. Everything blew up. Stop the steal, rigged votes, voting machine ballots, right? All that stuff. January 6th, in hindsight, had Trump waited to fill that seat, it would never have gotten filled. The craziness that happened after the election would have just precluded it. So again, Trump made the right decision. The fates were just lining up with him. All right? So what happened next? For the first time in, I don't know, 90 years, you have a court that is a 6-3 majority conservative. That just had never happened. Now, there have been times with 7 or 8 Republican appointed judges, but they were mostly moderates. I mean, fun fact, Planned Parenthood versus Casey was decided with almost all Republican appointees, yet was 6-3 in favor of abortion. Or 5-4, I should say, depending on the count. All right, so then what happens? Barrett comes to office, Biden wins the election, and then what happens? Well, not much. The court in its first year as a 6-3 court didn't quite go far, but they would shortly thereafter. In 2022, the court had its 3 most momentous cases decided in the span of about 3 days. So again, June of 22, you have 3 cases decided in the span of 3 days involving abortion, guns, and religion. The 3 third rails, get 3 third rails, the 3 most contentious issues, abortion, guns, and religion, back to back in 3 days, landmark rulings. Let's walk through them one at a time. The first decision was the Dobbs decision. The court, by a 5-4 vote, overrules Roe against Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. This is a decision that almost should have never been. You might recall there was actually a leak where a draft opinion was leaked to the press. In response, a man from California flew to Maryland with a backpack full of weapons. His goal is to assassinate Justice Kavanaugh, to try to stop the opinion from happening. Through only a miracle, he got up to Kavanaugh's house, and he never did it. Actually, it's unclear. He maybe had second thoughts. I don't even know what the heck happened. But he didn't do it, thank God, right? The opinion came out 5-4. Chief Justice Robertson votes to overrule Roe, but this was a momentous ruling that could not have been fathomable. Like, you have Dobbs on your casebook. I could not have imagined this when I was sitting where you're sitting in 2006 in law school. I just couldn't have fathomed it. It's like, well, all right, Republicans can't appoint judges who want to overrule Roe v. Wade. That's it. It's done. Okay, that's case number 1. Case number 2 involves guns. The court decides case called New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, B-R-U-E-N, Bruin. And Bruin was a challenge to New York's concealed carry law. In New York, you'd only carry a firearm if you had special permission or special cause from the government. Generally, if you knew the sheriff, you got your permit. If you were a celebrity, you got the permit. If you were just a regular person, you wouldn't. The Supreme Court said, no, this is unconstitutional. You cannot have this sort of regime where someone has discretion over your constitutional right. So long as you pass a background check, you should be able to get it. Okay, so that's the second big ruling. The third big ruling concerns religion. You will study in common law, or at least First Amendment, a case called the Lemon Test, Lemon v. Kurtzman. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. All right, what's the Lemon Test? The Lemon Test was enacted or passed in the 1970s. It was a Supreme Court case that said you can't have sort of an entanglement between church and state, right? You can't have this excessive entanglement between religion and government. The upshot of this is almost any effort to have religion in public life was going to be found to be unconstitutional. The Supreme Court overruled the Lemon Test. It was a case called Kennedy v. Bremerton about a football coach, high school football coach, who would take a knee. He would kneel at the 50-yard line after the game and say a prayer. And the court said that that action would not violate the religion clauses. All right, so these three cases, abortion, guns, religion, back to back, this ushered in the arrival of the Roberts Court. Right, this is the new Roberts Court. Around the same time, Justice Stephen Breyer announced he'd be stepping down from the court, and he's replaced by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's from very close-ish. She went to high school in Miami, so she's a native. She went to the same high school that Jeff Bezos went to. I can't remember the name of it. You don't know the name? That's it. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I don't know if she was contemporaries with Bezos, but I know they were around the same time. And Jackson replaced Breyer. Again, that doesn't really change the makeup of the court, but curiously, Justice Breyer was a bit more of a moderate. And he was actually good at sort of making compromise. He would bring the justices together in different ways. Justice Jackson doesn't do that. She's not interested in compromise. So in some regards, the Jackson nominee pushed the court further to the left, but shrunk the middle and made it less likely for there to be compromises. So now where we are with the court, it's a fairly solid 6-3 court. The court's liberals is Justice Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. They are more often than not in dissent, but not always. Believe it or not, and this is true, last term, only about 10% of the cases were 6-3, with the 3 liberals in dissent and the 6 conservatives in the majority. Only about 10%. About half the cases last year were either unanimous or 8-1. So despite what you might read, there's still a lot of consensus. And there were about another 10 cases with either 3 or 4 Republican appointees in dissent. So what do we have here? The court's middle vote, sort of the median voter, is Chief Justice John Roberts. Roberts is in the majority 95% of the time. He is the court, right? I am the state, he is the court. He decides where the court goes. After Roberts, let's take a guess. Who's in the majority more? Justice Kagan or Justice Alito? Kagan. Kagan was in the majority more than 80% of the time. Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch about 78% of the time. Basically, Thomas and Sotomayor are in the majority, roughly the same percentage. So this is a court where really you have the center as the Chief Justice, and then in any case, you might have Justice Barrett and or Justice Kavanaugh joining Roberts to have a more moderate opinion. Right? So this isn't really the sort of the case or the court you're thinking of. Now, a lot of what you read about is the so-called emergency docket or the shadow docket. You heard about this, the shadow docket? The court decides sort of 2 different buckets or different categories of cases. The first category of case concerns argued cases where they grant writ of certiorari and they hold oral argument and they decide a case maybe 1 year later, right? Those are the cases where the court is pretty, pretty balanced. But then you also have these emergency cases. And these arise invariably in Trump law, right? Where Trump does something, he issues an executive order, some judge in Boston or San Francisco blocks it, and then the government runs to the Supreme Court saying, you can't do that. So on the shadow docket, the emergency docket, the court is far more sort of stratified. And I think it's almost a difference of a view of what is the goal of the court, right? I think the Supreme Court's conservatives are very worried that these lower court judges are really causing a lot of sort of chaos. They're changing things very quickly without giving enough due regard to the executive branch. So they're saying, all right, stop, and we'll get to this later. All right, so now I want to pivot and talk about some of the more high-profile cases decided last year, and I'll give a little bit of a preview of the case for this year. Is that a good plan? All right,
Yeah,
good. All right, so last year, perhaps the biggest case was called United States against Skrmetti. It's an unusual name, Skrmetti, Skrmetti. Jonathan Skrmetti, he's the Attorney General of Tennessee. Yeah, there's a vowel missing somewhere there, right? SKR. SKR, right. So this was a case from Tennessee where the state banned certain medical procedures which is commonly known as gender-affirming care. This can involve puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and even surgery for transgender minors. The challenge was breastfeeding. This violates the Equal Protection Clause as far as sex discrimination, but also it violates the rights of parents. Parents want their kids to get these treatments, and it violates the due process rights of parents of direct upbringing of their children. The lower court said, no, this is constitutional, and even if there is sex discrimination, the state has a valid interest. The Supreme Court had a kind of an unusual opinion. It was by Chief Justice Roberts. He said, no, this is not sex discrimination. This is age discrimination. Huh? Age? Age. If you're 18, you get this treatment. If you're 17, you can't. And we all know that a classification on the basis of age is subject to only a deferential standard review, what's called a rational basis standard. You know, in New York, you get a driver's license at 17. Here, was it 15, 16? Right. Yeah. So states can choose different grounds for age. I think now almost 18 in New York City. So this is kind of a weird opinion by the Chief Justice, but he always kind of makes weird opinions, don't make a lot of sense, but anyway. But you have concurrences by Justices Barrett and Alito saying, yeah, this is probably sex discrimination, and it's okay also, right? This is a constitutional form of discrimination. Another big case from last year comes from Maryland. It was called Mahmoud v. Taylor. In this case, a public school district, Montgomery County, provided LGBTQ plus storybooks for K through 12, including kindergarten. Initially, parents wanted to opt their kids out of this, and they let them. They said, oh, no, too many kids are opting out, so we have to have no opt-outs. The court, again, by a 6-3 vote, found this was unconstitutional, and there's a threat of undermining parents' religious beliefs and their upbringing of their children. Sotomayor wrote a very vigorous dissent, arguing that this interferes with school boards and basically dictates how schools should run their programming. Another case, TikTok v. Garland. Who has TikTok on their phone?
I don't use that Chinese spy app.
Yeah, you shouldn't. Let what he said, delete it immediately. This is dangerous stuff, right? I mean, you probably. Hi, Chancellor Chi, right?
Well, actually, interesting tidbit, and I'm sorry to interject, but this is important that people should know. Looking at media like TikTok actually trains your brain to have the symptoms of ADHD. There's been studies showing this.
What autism? Sorry. Just take some Tylenol later. I don't use social media at all. I think it's awful for your brain. The dopamine hits are serious, right? You just get addicted. It hits you. The swipe. Oh, it's terrible for you. I got young kids. I don't let them even touch phones. It's terrible. Anyway, so Congress tries to ban TikTok. They passed a law, bipartisan. Republicans, Democrats say we should not have a Chinese app on American phones. That's a bad idea. So again, bipartisan legislation banning TikTok, and the law goes into effect on January 19th of 2025. Okay, January 19th. What's funny that date? Oh, yeah, that's the day before the inauguration. So TikTok brings a challenge saying this violates the First Amendment, goes to the Supreme Court. SCOTUS says 9-0. This law is valid, that the government has an interest in making sure we don't have Chinese apps on American phones. National security, easy, right? This was not a hard case to decide, 9-0. So you think, okay, the Supreme Court upholds the law, so the law goes into effect. Yeah, no, it doesn't. So on January 19th, President Biden signs an executive order, or at least maybe his pen, I don't know who signed it. I mean, maybe it was the auto pen, I'm not sure. But something with Biden's signature says, I will not enforce this law for the next 24 hours. Trump, you figure it out. Okay, didn't say that last part, but the upshot was Biden will not enforce the law. Trump comes to office January 20th, he says, I'm not going to enforce the law either. So we have a duly enacted statute upheld unanimously by the U.S. Supreme Court that President Biden and President Trump refused to enforce. Whoa. And in fact, the Attorney General said there will be no liability if you enforce this law. So Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T, no liability. Go ahead, keep it on your phones, right? Keep it on your networks. Crazy, right? Crazy. And Trump keeps saying, oh, you're working on a deal. I don't know, maybe we'll put in the East Wing, the new building, the new TikTok center, right? The TikTok ballroom, I don't know, right? I was in D.C. last week. I passed by the White House. Like, oh, it looks a little different. A little smaller. So Trump working on a deal. So TikTok is still in your phones. All right. One more case from last term. I'll move on to the new stuff. nationwide injunctions. So for the last, I don't know, 15 years or so, 12 years or so, this has been lurking. Can a single judge in a single division issue an order that binds everyone, everywhere, even if they're not party to the case? It's sometimes called a national injunction or a nationwide injunction. Justice Gorsuch prefers universal injunction. I agree with Gorsuch. It's not just about the nation. It's everywhere on planet Earth. If a government official goes to China or goes to Russia or goes to Japan, the order follows them. It's like Jean Valjean. No matter where you go, they will be by your side. Sorry, lameness. Both Republican and Democrat presidents hate national injunctions, but states love them. Why? During the Obama administration, all the Republican states brought lawsuits seeking nationwide injunctions. And during the Trump administration, all the Democratic states brought nationwide injunction claims. And during Biden, it flipped again. You have all the Republican states, and then again during Trump, all of the Democrat states. So it just flips every 4 years. There's really not much more to it than that, right? Whoever's in power likes whoever's out of power likes the injunction, and when you're in power, you don't like them. Okay. The case comes to the Supreme Court in a case called Casa versus Trump. Now, the merit issue is actually very significant. It involves birthright citizenship. Trump's first day in office, he rules that we will no longer grant citizenship documents to children of illegal aliens. This was a change in the government's position for the last 100-something years, but Trump said we're not going to do it. Almost immediately, judges in Seattle and Boston, everywhere else said, nationwide injunctions. All pregnant mothers nationwide, you are now protected. If you give birth to a kid, your kid's going to be a citizen, period. All right? They lose in the lower courts, and they have a choice. Do they ask the Supreme Court to rule on whether these injunctions are valid, or do they ask the Supreme Court to rule on whether birthright citizenship is provided by the Constitution? They chose door number one. They said, Supreme Court, rule on the nationwide injunction issue. And the court did rule, an opinion by Justice Barrett, 6-3, holding that nationwide injunctions are not consistent with the judicial power. But the caveat, you can still do class actions, and you still have this what's called set aside under the Administrative Procedure Act. So there's still other ways of getting nationwide relief. I don't know how much effect the Supreme Court's ruling in Casa will actually have. I think litigants have already sort of gotten around it, but that was the ruling from last term. All right, I know we have about 10 minutes left. Let's go to this term. This term has a lot of big issues. One of which is the removal power. Trump fired everyone. He fired the head of the FTC, of the NLRB, the EEOC. I can't remember all these alphabet soup agencies, right? He fired everyone. Some of these departments have what's called protections. The law says you can only fire them for cause. Malfeasance, neglect, abuse. Trump has said, no, I just don't want a Democrat there. I want a Republican there. That's all he said. The Supreme Court is poised to rule in favor of Trump, I think at least. The court will probably overrule a case of Humphrey's Executor, a decision from 1935, which said that Congress protect members of these so-called independent agencies. I think that will be a thing of the past. Another big case we argue next week involves tariffs. Yes, tariffs. These are taxes on imports. The Supreme Court is being asked on a very important expedited basis to decide the basis of Trump's tariffs. Let me just give a caveat here. We've collected billions with a B, billions of dollars of tariffs so far. If the Supreme Court were to rule the tariffs were unlawful, do we have to pay that money back? Do we have that money? No. So the government's basically said to the Supreme Court, yeah, if you rule that we have to pay back this money, it will cause an economic global collapse. Yeah, thanks, bye, right? I don't know what the court does here. I think there are actually some decent arguments that the tariffs are unlawful. I think there's also some decent arguments that the tariffs, you can squish a statute enough to get there. But the consequence of this is it would basically destroy Trump's foreign policy, right? When Trump, Canada, I don't like what you said in your commercial on the World Series, tariffs, right? Mexico, I don't like what you do with fentanyl, tariffs, right? He just throw these things around. This is his foreign policy tool. You would basically handcuff the president. And worse, we've reached deals with many countries based on Trump's authority. Do those deals now get unraveled? Right, again, so the Supreme Court, to Trump's fault or credit, is backed in a corner. I don't see how they rule against them across the board. Maybe they find some narrow way to rule against them on something minor, but the big ticket items, I don't think they can do it. Okay, that's what we're talking about now. I got only 10 minutes left. What questions you all have? Yes, sir.
What did you teach when you were a professor at law school? As a law professor?
I'm still a professor.
Okay, what do you teach?
Oh, what do I teach? I teach constitutional law.
Okay, I figured.
Yes.
All right, cool. Thank you.
I also teach property. I like property.
Cool.
Do you like property?
It was okay.
I love property. Yes.
What would be the arguments against the president not being able to implement the tariffs?
Right. So the tariff case turns not on the Constitution, but on statutes. Right? There's a law called IEPA. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA. You know IEPA? This is a law that gives the president powers in emergencies. And it gives the president power to impose different kinds of economic penalties and the like. But it's not clear if that extends to taxes, right? The word tax is not in the statute. So it's been argued that the laws does not give the president the power to impose taxes. I think this case is actually tricky. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. But there's also a doctrine called the major question doctrine, which you might have heard of. And the major question doctrine goes like this. If there's some really big question that Congress wants the president to take care of, they will say so expressly. They won't just leave it as a hint. So you can't find this major power to impose tariffs elsewhere. Because if you could, Congress usually imposes taxes, not the president. So that's sort of the issue there. Okay, what other question? Yeah.
Why do you think that both liberal courts and right-wing courts both seem to hate the Fourth Amendment?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't get Fourth Amendment questions. I didn't even mention the Fourth Amendment. What's interesting is that in the 60s, the Fourth Amendment was having a good time, right? Almost every year there was some other criminal procedure case where they found new rights protection of criminals. Starting in the 1970s, there was kind of a blowback to this, right? Richard Nixon wanted to appoint judges who were tough on crime. And I think that's kind of stuck. And even after Nixon left office, and you have sort of more Democrat appointments, they're not so hardcore on criminal procedure rights. The current court has no interest in the rights of criminals. I think on the Eighth Amendment for sure, it's like, all right, execute them, right? They don't care. I'm not sure there's much protection for privacy rights. So that's just sort of an issue that was very prominent decades ago that seems to have just fallen by the wayside. Hello.
I'm joining our class here.
That's okay. You can enjoy for a few minutes. Yes, sir.
I want to ask, with the TikTok law, how, you said that both presidents just sort of refused to enforce the law?
Yeah, that's exactly what I said.
Part of the deal with that, I think, was that they needed to force a sale, right? So if they sold to like a US company like Oracle,
Right.
Oracle currently has a big share of TikTok, and actually all of the servers that United States users connect to TikTok are US based. They're owned by Oracle, and the algorithm that US users see is also run by Oracle.
Oh, so the sale happened before?
No, the deal has not happened yet. Yeah, the deal has not happened yet. Right, but I want to answer the first part of your question. So yes, two presidents have basically said, we will not enforce the law. And this is a serious issue. Yeah. Usually the Constitution says you have the duty to faithfully execute the law. And the President Biden, President Trump said, we're not going to do it. And they're not given a very good reason why they would. They basically just said, we need more time to work out a deal. But that's not how the law works. So usually when the president does something that's dubious, you have a lawsuit, but no one's bringing this lawsuit. Why? Verizon doesn't want to sue. They want to keep TikTok on their phones, right? AT&T and T-Mobile don't want to sue. Apple doesn't want to sue. So who's actually injured by this law?
TikTok?
TikTok wants it on their phone, so no one's injured. In other words, the people who
That's
might,
true, yeah.
and because the Attorney General said we will not prosecute you, there's no risk of further criminal prosecution. They just keep on the phones. There was a period of about maybe 12 hours where TikTok was unavailable, and then Trump came in and they put a big banner, Chinese app. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you, President Trump, for reenacting TikTok. It's kind of crazy.
But I did notice when it came back the second time, it felt different. It felt like it was,
Not
there-
spying on you?
Yeah, but there was less political stuff. It was more like puppies and family stuff and cars and,
You wanna play it
yeah.
safe?
There wasn't,
Okay. Alrighty. Yes, sir.
I have a question about Humphrey's executor.
Sure.
Do you think that it would get overturned, and what would be the reasoning behind it, aside from, well, it's an infringement on executive power?
Right, so I think it's very likely that Humphrey's executor gets overruled in the near future. There's different ways the court can do it. One way they can just say is that we've been chipping away at Humphreys for many years, and it's just inconsistent with recent precedent. So in SELA law and other cases, they've said the executive power must be vested in the president. And they sort of just table the Humphrey executor issue. Another way they could do it's like this. When Humphrey was decided in 1935, the FTC was different. It actually wasn't a purely executive agency. But today, the agency has a lot broader powers. Perhaps they can say, whatever the agency was like in 1935, it's different today, right? And they can distinguish it. The problem, though, is that there are many other agencies they'd have to then knock out. But I think once you overrule Humphreys, the other agencies fall apart. So again, the Chief Justice will almost certainly write this opinion. I don't know what he's going to do, but I think he will. I call John Roberts a magician. He's like Houdini. He's like distraction. Don't pay attention to what's over here. Look over there, like distractions. He'll just distract you, and he'll do some sort of Houdini trick. What other questions you have? Yes. Ma'am, over here.
What's your opinion on the birthright citizen issue? Do you think that there's valid constitutional basis in overturning the birthright citizenship?
Sure, it's a good question. So I run this issue years ago, and years ago I came to the conclusion that the children of illegal aliens are citizens. I think the issue is closer than I thought it was, but I still think unbalanced, that's the right answer. There's been a lot of new evidence I've read that casts a little bit of doubt, but not enough. The challenge is this. Immigration law didn't really exist in the 1860s. We didn't really have immigration law. I'll just give you an example. What if you were an American woman, a woman in America who marries a foreign national? You lose your American citizenship. The wife would automatically take the citizenship of the husband. Right? That was just a facet. Women had no legal identity as a married woman, as I'm sure you well know. So has that map onto the present? Let's say you have a mother who's a U.S. citizen, the father's an alien, right? What happens to that kid? That would be unthinkable in the 1860s because the woman would get rid of her citizenship. So it's very hard to sort of to juxtapose our current situation. So I think on balance, even if the constitutional question is not clear, the fact that there's been 150 years of executive branch practice on this point, in my view, kind of settles the matter. It's called liquidation. So even if I'm not sure, there's so much liquidation and reliance, I don't think you can overrule it. Now, I mean, could Congress pass a constitutional amendment tomorrow? Yeah, they could do that, right? And we could get rid of it. Most European nations don't have birthright citizenship, and they find a way to function. But I think under the current law, we should keep it where we are. Oh, yes, sir. Okay. Hold on. Over here. Yeah, I want to get a first timer.
I've already asked a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that the pardon power of the president is overused and or weaponized at all?
Did he get a pardon yet?
The pardoning.
No, I asked, did he get pardoned yet or no?
Did he get a pardon yet? Not that
Did he?
I know.
No, did he not get pardoned?
Did he?
So the pardon, I'm mostly joking. The pardon is one of these sort of uncontrollable, absolute powers of the president. And even Hamilton and the Federalists warned about the risk of abuse. I think you would need an amendment to the Constitution to limit the pardon power. I'm not sure I would favor that. One thing about pardon, though, it's a public act. And when the president takes a public act, everyone knows and they can judge him based on it. So the president, let's say pardons, I don't know, his son on the last day of the administration, people can judge him for that. If Trump pardons all of his acolytes, people can judge him for that as well. I'm not as troubled by it as some people might be. I think there's a bit of overcriminalization. I think pardons are actually used best to deal with political controversies. I mean, after the Civil War, you might not know this, after the Civil War, President Andrew Johnson pardoned former Confederates. And he did it in the interest of moving past the acrimony of the Civil War. Right? If we can pardon Confederates, then that's a pretty big deal. These do with the actual insurrectionists. All right, just one last question, we'll head up.
Yeah, you had mentioned that the TikTok deal hasn't gone through yet. My understanding is that some shares have been bought by Oracle, but not the majority ownership.
Was that right? I haven't followed all the details. I don't know.
Or I think they need FTC approval to go through with the actual acquisition is part of the holdup on that. I heard a blip about it last night.
Very good. All right. Thank you all so much. I welcome your questions. Thank you.